I never thought I'd be grateful for my husband's obsession with restoring antique furniture until the day his mother brought that broken cradle to our baby shower. The cradle that had rocked 5 generations of Mitchell babies, or so Barbara loved to remind everyone. The party had been perfect until then. Our backyard was decorated with soft yellow and mint green balloons, a color scheme that had taken me weeks to decide on. My best friend Kate had outdone herself with the catering, and even the weather seemed to be celebrating with us, offering a perfect spring afternoon. "I can't believe you're finally having a baby shower." My sister-in-law Jessica hugged me for the 10th time that day, her hand resting on my still flat stomach. "After 7 years of trying, it's a miracle." It was a miracle. One that had cost us nearly all our savings, countless tears, and 3 rounds of IVF. But here we were, finally celebrating our little miracle at 6 weeks pregnant. We'd wanted to wait longer to announce, but Barbara had other plans. A Mitchell needs to be celebrated from the moment they exist, she'd insisted when she found out. I'd learned long ago that arguing with Barbara Mitchell was like trying to stop a tornado with an umbrella, pointless and potentially dangerous. I should have known she was planning something when she disappeared shortly after arriving. Barbara never missed an opportunity to be the center of attention, and she'd been suspiciously quiet during the gift opening. "Everyone." Barbara's voice cut through the cheerful chatter. "I have a special presentation to make." My husband David, who had been chatting with his cousins by the grill, tensed visibly. He knew that tone in his mother's voice as well as I did. It was the same tone she used when she announced at our wedding that she was gifting us her old house, the one that turned out to need $200,000 in repairs, and came with the condition that she could visit whenever she wanted. Two of Barbara's flying monkeys, as I privately called her enabler friends, wheeled in what looked like a large piece of furniture covered in a sheet. Barbara stood beside it, perfectly coiffed in her pastel pink suit, pearls gleaming at her throat. As everyone knows, the Mitchell family cradle has been passed down through generations. She paused for dramatic effect, her hand clutching her pearls. "Every Mitchell baby for the past 150 years has slept in this cradle. My Thomas, then David and his siblings, and now." She yanked off the sheet with a flourish, revealing a once beautiful Victorian cradle that now looked like it had been through a war. The wood was splintered, one of the rockers was completely missing, and the once delicate carvings were chipped beyond recognition. "Well," Barbara's smile could have cut glass. "I thought since you'll never fill it anyway, you might as well have this worthless thing. It's rather fitting, don't you think? Broken cradle. Broken." "Mom." David started forward, his face flushed with anger. But I was already moving. 7 years of Barbara's passive-aggressive comments, her helpful suggestions about adoption, her constant reminders that Mitchell men need sons to carry on the name. It had all led to this moment. "Actually, Barbara," I kept my voice steady as I reached for my purse, "I'm so glad you brought up family history today." The look of uncertainty that flickered across her face was almost worth every nasty comment she ever made. Almost. "You see," I continued, pulling out an old yellowed newspaper clipping I'd been carrying for months, "I've recently become very interested in Mitchell family history, especially the summer of 1992. Ring any bells?" The color drained from Barbara's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her perfectly manicured hand clutched at her pearls again, but this time in desperation rather than dramatic effect. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "Wouldn't what, Mom?" David asked, looking between us in confusion. I smiled, channeling every ounce of Barbara's own saccharine sweetness. "Oh, I think it's time everyone knew the truth about the Mitchell family legacy. After all, isn't that what you're always preaching? Family history is so important." "Sarah, please," Barbara's voice shook. "Not here. Not today." But I was done being silent. Done watching this woman torture every new addition to the family with her impossible standards and hidden threats. Done protecting a secret that had poisoned this family for 3 decades. "David, honey," I turned to my husband, whose face showed equal parts concern and curiosity. "Did you ever wonder why there are no pictures of your mom pregnant with you? Why your birth certificate has some unusual details?" The party had gone completely silent. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Barbara's friends, usually so quick to jump to her defense, stood frozen, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. "What are you talking about?" David's voice was barely a whisper. I unfolded the newspaper clipping, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The headline read, "Local woman arrested in black market adoption scandal. Your mother has some explaining to do about where Mitchell babies really come from." I looked directly at Barbara, whose perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. "Don't you, Barbara?" The sound of breaking glass made everyone jump. Barbara's friend Margaret had dropped her champagne flute, but no one moved to clean it up. All eyes were fixed on Barbara, who looked like she was seeing a ghost. Barbara's voice cracked. "I did what I had to do. The Mitchell name." "The Mitchell name?" I cut her off. "You mean the name you've been using to torment every woman who marries into this family? The name you've been hiding behind while you make us feel worthless for not producing heirs fast enough?" David reached for the newspaper clipping, his hand trembling slightly. I watched as his eyes scanned the article, watched as understanding dawned on his face, followed by disbelief, then anger. "Mom," his voice was different now, harder. "What did you do?" Barbara's perfect facade finally cracked. Tears streaked down her cheeks, leaving trails in her expensive makeup. "I had to," she whispered. "Your father, the family, they needed in here. I couldn't. But before she could finish, before she could spin another web of lies, I pulled out the DNA test results that would change everything. Because Barbara's secret wasn't just about what she'd done 30 years ago. It was about why she'd done it, a truth that would shake the Mitchell family to its core. And as I opened my mouth to continue, I saw Barbara's eyes roll back in her head as she crumpled to the ground, her perfect pink soup collecting grass stains as she fainted dead away on our perfectly manicured lawn. The Mitchell family legacy was about to change forever, and it all started with a broken cradle and a 30-year-old secret. The chaos that followed Barbara's collapse was exactly what you'd expect at a baby shower turned family drama. Margaret and her fellow flying monkeys fluttered around Barbara's unconscious form while Jessica called 911, more out of obligation than concern. I'd seen Barbara pull the fainting card before, usually when confronted with uncomfortable truths. David stood frozen, still holding the newspaper clipping, his eyes scanning the words over and over as if they might change with each reading. The article detailed a sophisticated black market adoption ring that had operated in our small town in the early 90s, arranging illegal adoptions for wealthy families. Several prominent community members had been arrested, but some names had been redacted to protect the families involved. "She's coming around," Margaret announced, fanning Barbara with a paper plate. Right on cue, Barbara's eyes fluttered open, immediately seeking out David. "Sweetheart," she reached for him weakly. "I can explain everything." "Can you?" David's voice was unnaturally calm. "Can you explain why there's a newspaper article about black market adoptions from the year I was born? Can you explain why my birth certificate looks different from Jessica's and Tom's?" Barbara struggled to sit up, her perfect hair now mussed with grass clippings. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Barbara?" I interrupted, pulling out another document from my purse. "Because I have here the full unredacted version of that article. The one that lists all the names, including yours and Richard's." The remaining party guests were trying to pretend they weren't listening, but I could see them inching closer, phones discreetly recording. This would be all over the Mitchell family group chat within hours. "You had no right," Barbara hissed, her maternal act dropping. "No right to dig into private family matters." "Private family matters?" David's calm finally cracked. "You've spent years tormenting Sarah about not giving you grandchildren, about failing the Mitchell legacy, and all this time you've been hiding this." "I did it for you." Barbara's voice rose hysterically. "Your father needed an heir. The Mitchell name had to continue." "But why, Mom?" David demanded. "Why was it so important? Important enough to buy a baby on the black market?" The silence that followed his question was deafening. Barbara's face went through a series of emotions, fear, anger, calculation, before settling into resignation. "Because," she said quietly, "the Mitchell fortune depended on it." Now it was my turn to reveal the next piece of the puzzle. "You mean the trust fund requirements? The one that specified a male heir had to be produced within 5 years of marriage to maintain control of the family company?" Barbara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "How did you? I'm a genealogist, Barbara. Did you forget that? When you started pressuring us about having children, I decided to do some research. I found some very interesting documents in the county records. David looked between us, confusion evident on his face. What trust fund? What requirements? Your grandfather's will, I explained, pulling out yet another document. He left everything to your father, but with conditions. Richard had to produce a male heir within 5 years of marriage, or the company would be transferred to your Uncle James' line. But Uncle James died years ago, David said. He never had children. No, Barbara's voice was barely audible. He didn't, because I made sure he couldn't. The collective gasp from the remaining party guests would have been comical if the implications weren't so horrific. Even Margaret stepped away from Barbara, her loyalty finally finding its limit. What did you do? David's voice shook. Barbara's chin lifted defiantly. What I had to. James was going to expose us. He found out about the adoption, threatened to tell everyone. He was going to ruin everything we built. So you, David couldn't finish the sentence. The car accident wasn't an accident, I said quietly. Was it, Barbara? She didn't answer, but her silence said everything. Oh God, David stumbled backward, his face pale. Oh God, Mom, what did you do? I protected this family, Barbara suddenly shouted, struggling to her feet. Everything I did was to protect the Mitchell name. And now you, she pointed a shaking finger at me, you're destroying it all. No, Barbara, I stood my ground. You destroyed it. With every lie, every scheme, every cruel word to every woman who married into this family. And for what? Money. Status. You don't understand, she spat. You could never understand what it means to protect a legacy. You're right, I agreed. I don't understand destroying lives to protect a legacy. But I do understand creating one. I pulled out the final document from my purse, my latest ultrasound picture. This baby, I said, holding it up, will never know the weight of your toxic legacy, Barbara. Because David and I are starting our own. One built on truth and love, not lies and manipulation. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the arrival of the ambulance Jessica had called. Barbara's face had taken on an almost greenish tinge as she realized her carefully constructed world was crumbling. David, she pleaded one last time, sweetheart, everything I did was for you. But David wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the ultrasound picture in my hands, tears streaming down his face. No, Mom, he said finally. Everything you did was for yourself, and now you've lost everything anyway. As the paramedics approached, Barbara made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. If you do this, she threatened, if you expose all this, you'll lose everything. The company, the house, the Mitchell name. Good, David cut her off. Because I don't want any of it. Not anymore. The paramedics led Barbara away, her threats dissolving into sobs. The remaining guests quickly made their excuses and left, leaving David and me alone in our decorated backyard, the broken cradle a fitting symbol of the shattered legacy it represented. But this wasn't the end of the story, because there was one more secret, the biggest one of all, that Barbara didn't know I'd discovered. One that would truly destroy everything she'd sacrificed so much to protect. The week following the baby shower was a blur of police interviews and family chaos. The Mitchell empire was crumbling, but the final blow was still waiting in the sealed envelope on our kitchen counter. I'd been saving it, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that would complete Barbara's downfall. That moment came sooner than expected when David's father, Richard, showed up at our door unannounced. We need to talk, he said, looking older than his 60 years. The scandal had taken its toll. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his eyes haunted. David let him in reluctantly. We hadn't spoken to him since Barbara's arrest 3 days ago, when the police reopened Uncle James' accident case. If you're here to defend Mom, David started. I'm not, Richard interrupted, sinking into our kitchen chair. I'm here to confess. I exchanged glances with David before reaching for the envelope. Before you do, there's something you should see. Richard looked at the envelope with tired eyes. More revelations. The last one. I promised, pulling out a DNA test result. And the most important. David sat beside his father, his hand finding mine under the table. We watched as Richard read the document, his face growing paler with each line. This can't be right, he whispered. It is, I said gently. I had it tested 3 times to be sure. You're not a Mitchell by blood, Richard. Your mother had an affair with James's father, your uncle. You and James were actually half-brothers. The irony was almost poetic. Barbara had orchestrated James's death to protect the Mitchell legacy, not knowing her husband had no legitimate claim to it in the first place. Richard's hands shook as he set down the paper. How did you find out? Genealogy research, I explained. When I started digging into the family history, I found inconsistencies, medical records that didn't make sense. Then I found your grandmother's diary in the attic of the old Mitchell house. The house Barbara insisted we keep, David realized. She never let anyone clean that attic. Because she knew, Richard said quietly. She found out shortly after we were married. That's why she was so desperate for a male heir. She thought if we had a son quickly enough, no one would question the legitimacy of our claim to the company. But you couldn't have children, I finished. So she turned to the black market. Richard nodded, tears forming in his eyes. We tried for years. When Barbara discovered my infertility, she became obsessed with finding a solution. Then she heard about a doctor who could arrange private adoptions, no questions asked. And you went along with it. David's voice cracked. I was weak, Richard admitted. I loved her, and I was terrified of losing everything. But I never knew about James. You have to believe me, I didn't know she would. He couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of 30 years of lies seemed to crush him into his chair. The police need to know all of this, I said firmly. Barbara's not just guilty of arranging an illegal adoption anymore. She committed murder to protect a claim that was never legitimate in the first place. I'll tell them everything, Richard promised. I should have done it years ago. I'm so sorry, David. You deserve better parents than us. David was quiet for a long moment, his hand tightening around mine. You're right. I did. But now I have the chance to be a better parent myself. I placed my hand on my stomach, thinking of our miracle baby growing inside. A baby that would never know the weight of false expectations or a toxic legacy. What happens to the company now? David asked. Richard gave a hollow laugh. It goes to James's nearest living relative, which ironically would have been me if we'd known the truth 30 years ago. Now, it will probably be dissolved, the assets split among the shareholders. Good, David said firmly. Let it end. We'll build something new, something honest. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Barbara had confessed everything to the police, hoping for a plea deal. Her carefully constructed world had finally collapsed completely. Richard stood slowly, looking years older than when he'd arrived. I should go to the station. They'll want my statement. At the door, he turned back one last time. The baby, will you let me be a grandfather? A real one this time, no expectations, no demands. David looked at me and I nodded slightly. We'll see, he told his father. It will depend on how honest you are from now on. This child deserves nothing but truth in their life. After Richard left, David and I stood in our kitchen, looking at the scattered documents that had exposed 3 decades of lies. What do we do now? He asked softly. I walked to the backyard where the broken cradle still sat, a reminder of where this all began. Now we build our own legacy, one of truth, love, and acceptance. David wrapped his arms around me, his hands resting on my stomach. I liked the sound of that. As we stood there in the fading light, I thought about Barbara, sitting in a jail cell, finally facing the consequences of her actions. I thought about the baby growing inside me, who would never know the burden of false expectations or a toxic family legacy. The Mitchell name might have been built on lies, but our child would build their own name, their own story. And it would be beautiful, because it would be real. Sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave our children is the freedom to create their own.